Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where Marvel Studios, despite not releasing a final flashy trailer for Doctor Strange, nevertheless continue to do an excellent job of keeping it in the news. And part of what's contributing to that is that they've just kicked off their worldwide publicity tour, with the first stop being in Hong Kong. And I'm sure many of you saw those photos surface the other day. They also had like a cool Doctor Strange figure that was up on stage with them. It was pretty impressive. I think that it's been interesting to see the ad campaign and the discussion around the movie evolve, right? They've had two hurdles in their way. We're going to talk about box office in just a moment. That's the major headline, the latest major headline. But I do think it's worth noting that they've been trying to overcome the two biggest obstacles for the film, and that's some controversy. The first being that it's, and I've discussed this myself, copying a lot from Christopher Nolan's work, particularly Inception, and I think that that's the whole reason they did that 15-minute IMAX preview on Monday. I heard I didn't get to go. I couldn't miss Movie Math 2 weeks in a row, so I missed it. But I've heard a number of you talk about how, it had different visual stylings. And also, I even saw The Hollywood Reporter run a headline that said, IMAX 15-minute preview proves that Doctor Strange is not like Inception, right? And so I was like, I wonder if Kevin Feige was like, what would really help me out, Hollywood Reporter, if you would put that in your headline. But I think the best way to shut down that discussion would have been to release a final trailer that dispelled that obstacle, that discussion, and they didn't do that. They did have the Universes Within featurette, which I think showed a couple of other stylings in terms of visual effects, but I think that a final trailer would have been the most effective. But they didn't go that route, so I'm very curious to see the film itself. And then, of course, there's the whitewashing controversy, which they addressed head-on in Hong Kong, saying that they were never going to make the Ancient One Asian, etc., etc. I think that because it's Marvel, I think that, and also because they have Benedict Wong playing the character of Wong, I think that they're going to maybe get past this. But I think it is a little bit of a problem for the movie and could potentially slow down its momentum just a little bit. But anyway, all of this publicity seems to be working because the box office tracking has finally started to come in, and the movie, the wide range is that it could open anywhere between 50 and 75 million, but the smart money is on 64 million. That would put it right in the same league as the first Thor and Captain America movies, not counting for inflation. But remember, Hollywood never counts for inflation because it's almost never in their favor, right? So 64, 75 would be amazing, but 64 would be a very respectable opening. And actually, in striking distance of the opening for Star Trek Into Darkness, Benedict Cumberbatch's only really other big blockbuster that he's appeared in visually. Of course, he is the voice of Smaug in the Hobbit films, but he was not on camera. So I think that 64 sounds reasonable. It just has to beat Ant-Man, which opened at 57 million. And it's similar casting. Paul Rudd equals a Benedict Cumberbatch, right? And also the characters, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, not particularly well known. And also, this movie doesn't benefit as Captain America, Civil War did, and also the upcoming Thor Ragnarok, from having another Avenger join in the fun. Even Winter Soldier, I think, benefited from having Black Widow as a major part of the action. But that is not the case with Doctor Strange. Very much insulated as a film. Well, with characters, and of course a big part of it is that it's going to be tying in so heavily to the Infinity War film because of the Infinity Stone that may or may not, I'm trying not to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen the copious hints about what's going on in the movie. But it opens the same, so it just, again, has to just beat 57 million, and it can't come in below that because then it would be the lowest opening ever for a Marvel film. The competition looks to be not that strong, actually. It's a very busy weekend. Loving will come out in limited release, but the wide releases that weekend, November 4th, are Hacksaw Ridge, which is only projected to have an 11 million opening. That trailer was super hot. And I think that it might do very well with religious audiences. So that 11 to me seems a little low. The only reason that would be realistic is if Mel Gibson's still a huge box office disadvantage of his involvement, even just behind the camera. So we'll see how that works out. And then Trolls is only expected to open with 28 million. That is absolutely devastating for DreamWorks and Fox, which is releasing that movie. Universal is like, whew, glad our deal didn't start just quite yet. You can have that one, Fox. No problem. That for a family animated movie around getting close to the holiday season, that's so bad. But it looks like, Doctor Strange has more of a wide open weekend than one might have initially thought. So that's the Doctor Strange box office tracking. I'm curious, do you plan to go? Do you have your tickets already? And do you think that it can not only beat Ant-Man, but do you think it can come in at Thor at cap levels? I also think it's worth noting that Ant-Man had very good box office ant legs, because I think it was a really fun film. And actually ended up doing quite well in the long run. It came in over 500 million, did very well. All right, so not as well as some of the other Marvel movies, but for a first off, and considering all the strikes against it, to come in stronger than I think like some of the first Cap and Thor movies, that's pretty impressive. So anyway, the second story of the day, speaking of Marvel, and they're going to be making a lot of headlines as they do their interviews. Kevin Feige always participates in these junkets, so people are going to be asking as much as they try and get as much information as they can about the MCU, and Kevin Feige is one of those executives who's always happy to spitball, right? I mean, he doesn't always give a lot of information, but he's willing to, have a pleasant, casual discussion with the press. So here's one nugget of genuine information that he gave out, and that's that Captain Marvel is going to be, aka Carol Danvers, played by Brie Larson, will be the most powerful character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, I'm super excited to see a female character really be in the thick of a superhero action sequence, right? Not on the fringe, not like, all the jokes about what does Black Widow really bring to the table, right? I mean, they're annoying because I think she's very effective, but at the same time, you're like, you can see where the joke comes from. You're not like, that's ridiculous. You're like, okay, so you're like, she has clear qualities that are good. But Carol Danvers, to see Captain Marvel be able to get in there and actually be able to shift the balance of power and fights, etc., I think is pretty exciting. But then on the other hand, I think it's dangerous to continue to have these female characters. They're doing it a lot in Star Wars with Jyn Erso and Rey. I'd hate to see that bleed over into Marvel, where you have women have to be, women, it's the Mary Sue kind of situation, right? Like, oh, we just can't have a strong female character. She has to be the best. I think it's really important and would be very beneficial to women if you show them in movies being able to participate in groups that have both men and women in them, because women are often shown in groups of all women, right? So if we can put a woman in a group with men that are included, and she just can function well in said group and contribute to the group, but not dominate the group or be rejected by the group, that would be great. Because, so often, the stereotype is that women just cannot function in a group. And that's very frustrating. So that's kind of what I would like. And that's one of the reasons I think Black Widow is such a great character, because she functions extremely well in a group. She's very good friends with both, Tony Stark, they're like kind of friends, but she's a really good friend with Captain America. And there's never been, there's been a little flirtation, but I just think like in a friendly manner. I think she's genuinely friends with Steve Rogers, and that's really nice to see. So another reason that Black Widow is so incredibly popular, particularly with female fans. But so I don't want to see Captain Marvel come in there and dominate the group. I think that could potentially have a backlash with fans, particularly because you're seeing that happen so strongly in Star Wars. So also they said that, since they said that the Captain Marvel movie will be an origin story and it'll be post-Infinity War, and they're tweaking her origin story, one has to wonder if maybe I feel that she'll be Infinity Stone powered for sure, but will she be multiple Infinity Stone powered is my question. If they're going to give her so many, to make her so powerful, and where will that power come from? Now she can't have all the stones. She can't have all the Infinity Stones. She can't just don the gauntlet, because Vision has dibs on the Mind Stone and Doctor Strange has dibs on maybe another stone. So I would be curious to see. I think the Power Stone is probably going to be what from Guardians of the Galaxy will be what gives her powers. But I wouldn't be surprised maybe if she ends up with a couple of stones. But even just from the comics, her powers are pretty cool. She would be kind of an organic Iron Man, because he needs a suit to fly and shoot blasts from his hands, but she does that all, again, organically. She can just naturally fly, and she can naturally shoot blasts from her hands. She also has super strength, and it sounds like a really cool character. I think Furiosa from Mad Max is also another good example of a female character who held her own, but held her own in partnership with the male lead in the film. I do not think we want to see Captain America and Iron Man have to stand aside, or even worse, Captain Marvel say, "Stand aside, boys, I've got this." I think I would throw up a little bit. All right, so anyway, and I think guys would get really angry. So all right, so let's go to the third story of the day, where Chris Rock has made comedic history over on Netflix. Now, he hasn't done a stand-up comedy special in 8 years. He's been busy making Top 5 and hosting the Oscars, and neither one of those turned out particularly well. So he's in a little bit of a need of reinvention to re-energize his career, and Netflix has been more than happy to step in and give him a major headline. He even trended a little bit yesterday with this news, and that's that Netflix wants him to do 2 comedy stand-up specials, and to do so, they're going to pay him $40 million. That's $20 million a piece. And so, of course, he said yes. That's amazing. He's already doing a tour anyway, a comedy tour. So now he just has to film it for Netflix, and bam, he gets an extra $20 million. And then he'll do another one. They think that the first one will air sometime in 2017. There's no discussion whether the second one will air. But this is a really big deal for a couple of reasons. It's the biggest payday ever for a stand-up comedian for a comedy special, beating out Louis C.K., Jerry Seinfeld, and Amy Schumer. I'm just impressed that Amy Schumer is on that list, right? That she actually I think Amy Schumer can be funny sometimes, but I don't think she's at the level of Louis C.K. and Jerry Seinfeld. But anyway, she made the cut, so good for her. But this is also really bad for HBO, who had a history with Chris Rock for 20 years, airing his previous stand-up comedy specials, and he even had a talk show on that premium cable network. So that's amazing. So great for Chris Rock. I think this is really going to re-energize his career. Suddenly, I think he's someone that maybe Hollywood would be interested in again for other projects, because he's coming off the heat of this headline. Especially, I never get around to watching the Netflix comedy specials, but I would watch Chris Rock's. He's a really good stand-up comedian. But I would watch these other Louis C.K., Seinfeld. And speaking of Seinfeld's actually a really competitive guy and extremely businesslike. And he's dropped his more happy-go-lucky persona from his sitcom days the more the time goes by, right? So I'll never forget, I saw Seinfeld live in Las Vegas, and someone in the audience shouted out, "I love you," some woman, and he dropped the facade for a moment, and he was like, "Right back at you, baby," or something like that. It was such an un-Seinfeld moment. I was like, oh, it's an act. That's not what he's really like. So because I bring that up because I think that he's not going to like this headline. Jerry Seinfeld dominates the stand-up comedy circuit. He is an incredibly hot ticket. He has a monthly show here in New York City at the Beacon Theater. Good luck getting a ticket to it. It sold out almost immediately for the whole year once it was announced. And so I think he's going to want to get a similar deal, if not a better deal. And I think HBO might be tempted to give it to him because this is also kind of embarrassing for them as well. So very interesting. All right, so let's get to today's viewer question from Rishi Chowdhury. Rishi, regular BTT viewer, hello. So Rishi has an interesting question saying, "Grace, we talk about female comedies a lot, especially with Ghostbusters." Very true. And Rishi continues saying, "My question to you is, why is a movie like Pitch Perfect 2 successful, but Ghostbusters isn't? Is it because Pitch Perfect has more male characters that aren't just stereotypes? Would love to hear your thoughts." A bunch of awesome emojis. Well, Rishi, great question. Now let's just take a look at the numbers, because interestingly, they're kind of within striking distance of each other in terms of their box office, right? So Ghostbusters, the most recent Ghostbusters, made $127 million domestic and $100 million overseas for $228 total. There's some change there, which is why you're like, wouldn't that be 227, Grace? All right, so anyway, I'm rounding. And then Pitch Perfect 2 made $184 domestic. That's amazing. $103 overseas and $287 worldwide. So again, Ghostbusters 228 versus Pitch Perfect 2 at 287. But here's the big difference. This is why one's considered a success and the other isn't. Ghostbusters cost $144 million to make, whereas Pitch Perfect 2 cost $29 million. So the return is infinitely better for Pitch Perfect 2. So here's why I think also Pitch Perfect 2 was just better received and did, to be fair, make about $60 million more. It's a more traditional depiction of women. And also it's a more traditional chick flick. So you're really hitting an easy target there. You know, it's not trying to redefine what type of, how women are portrayed in movies, how women see themselves, what type of movie women go to see. That's a tall order for Ghostbusters. Well, Pitch Perfect 2 is very, very recognizable, right? It has a built-in factor already in there. Also, I do think that it was a little bit more inclusive to men. They have some male characters in the Pitch Perfect franchise. They're not stereotypical. But let's be honest, I don't think a ton of guys were going to see Pitch Perfect 2 anyway. I mean, I'm sure men went, but not at the numbers that women did. So that's I think, something to acknowledge. But here's the thing with Ghostbusters. Because Ghostbusters was trying to change so much, it really needed to be perfect to pull off that change. And I don't think that the movie, while I enjoyed it, I don't think that Ghostbusters was funny enough. It was nowhere near as funny as the original Ghostbusters. And it also, I mean, Paul Feige has tried to make all these excuses as of late. He was on the front page of the Hollywood Reporter saying, I didn't know Ghostbusters was so sacred to all these young guys, who grew up on it. I didn't know, it was a boys only club. And it's like, come on, I think you should take some culpability for the fact that you didn't make a good enough movie. It wasn't funny enough, and it didn't really look like an A movie. We've talked a lot lately about how a movie looks. Does it look like it costs a lot of money? Does it look like you made the biggest effort you could? And I felt a lot of time Ghostbusters, from the cinematography to the sets, for instance, shooting Boston for New York City. Like, what? The original Ghostbusters didn't do that. To who you cast, right? A lot of TV actors in Ghostbusters, this new one. I know there were a lot of SNL actors in the first Ghostbusters, but still, it had this really great real world feel to it, where a lot of times, Ghostbusters seemed indistinguishable from a Saturday Night Live sketch, right? I think that's a good way to say it. Both had SNL actors, but one seemed like an SNL sketch and one seemed like a movie, and I think it's pretty clear which ones I'm talking about where. So, and also, especially because they spent $144 million on Ghostbusters, you think it would have looked better. So that's why I think the big difference is quality. I don't think it's the women, and also I think the Ghostbusters, I don't think that women weren't, it's not so much that women weren't allowed into the club, but, there was a really bad reaction to women trying to take over the club and basically kick guys out of it. So that, I said from the very beginning of my coverage that it was a mistake not to make Ghostbusters men and women on the team, and that's just something that, Paul Feige had to ultimately pay for. So I'm curious, what do you think is the difference between Ghostbusters and Pitch Perfect 2? Why do you think one did better than the other? In terms of, well, we know why one did better in terms of the box office and being considered a success with that budget to box office ratio, but I'd be curious to why you think they're perceived differently by the audience and the media. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Happy Friday. Please write down below today's top 3 stories, Rishi's viewer question, anything you'd like us to cover on Monday, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.